Welcome to WellNet TV. Our guest today is Dr. Feyrer-Melk. She is a preventative cardiologist who practices in Scottsdale, Arizona. Dr. Feyrer-Melk, welcome. What is different about preventive cardiology?
Well, everybody's doing prevention nowadays, measuring blood pressures and cholesterols and weights and encouraging patients to be physically active. And we've been using the same preventive measures really for decades. What we want to do, in my opinion, is really identify silent and invisible disease. And in order to do that, we have to employ different modalities that are above and beyond the standard of care.
So, doctor, how does one know if they have a healthy heart these days?
Well, Scott, if you go to a cardiologist, one of the first tests that she or he will order is a cholesterol test.
That's right. I was actually told that my scores are normal, so I am okay, right?
Well, patients take a lot of comfort in that, but look at this statistic. Over half of patients who have heart attacks have completely normal cholesterol levels.
Doctor, what about a stress test?
A stress test is accurate at detecting if a patient has a critical blockage in one of the arteries around their heart. And how that's defined is if they have a blockage more than 70%. However, almost 90% of heart attacks don't happen in those blockages. They happen in what we call intermediate lesions, blockages that are between 40 and 60%. Those blockages are not picked up by a stress test. So many instances, a stress test can give us a false sense of security. The third test a cardiologist will typically order is a fasting blood sugar test. And if you look at the American Diabetes Association website, they define diabetes as being a fasting blood sugar greater than 125 on 2 occasions. However, they also define insulin resistance or pre-diabetes as being a fasting blood sugar above 100. So we put a lot of emphasis on the fasting blood sugar test, but it's interesting to know that by the time that pancreas conks out enough and the fasting blood sugar rises above 100, about half of the pancreas is not functioning properly. So we're really diagnosing people at later stages of disease than we intend to with true prevention.
So doctor, let me guess, that isn't enough either.
Right. There's many more tests that we can do to establish whether or not you're at risk of something called insulin resistance or pre-diabetes. And with the diabetes epidemic that we have and the diabesity epidemic that we have in the United States today, that's of paramount importance. So classic cardiologists are trained to do risk assessments on patients. That means we need to categorize patients into low risk or moderate or high risk. And if they're high risk, we intervene on them in a higher degree. The problem with this is that in order to practice true prevention and look for silent and invisible disease, we need to go above and beyond those risk assessments. We need to actually look for disease, and we have many modalities in order to do that. We all know the Tim Russerts and the Jim Fixes of the world that passed their stress test with flying colors and then dropped dead a couple months later, even though they were deemed to be perfectly healthy. And our society is sometimes oddly content with this. It's almost as if our bodies are too difficult to understand. But cardiovascular disease is preventable.
So doctor, with all that medicine seems to know about cardiology, how does this happen in modern society?
It happens because we are experts in diagnosing end-stage disease. So we're experts in diagnosing with a stress test whether someone has a critical blockage being more than 70%. We're not experts in diagnosing someone who has mild or moderate disease. And really, I'm on my soapbox today to try to educate patients about the myth of mild disease. So many patients will come to me and they'll say, oh, Dr. Feyrer-Melk, I just have a small plaque in my carotid artery, or I have a small plaque or a small blockage in my heart artery. When did it ever become normal for us to have any disease in our arteries? I contend it's never normal to have disease in your arteries. So if a patient has a 20% blockage or an 80% blockage, it hardly matters as to how aggressive we should be with their care. Sure, the 80% blockage might require a little bit more aggressive interventions, but the 20%, if we really want to do true prevention, needs ultimate attention.
Doctor, it sounds like you're saying that standard medicine can't offer the best cardiology care available.
Absolutely. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer, both men and women. We need to use standards of care as a basic skeleton to approach patients, but we need to be able to offer patients an optimal level of care and endorse new technologies and new research in order to apply that to those patients and offer ultimate prevention.
Now, how can we prevent heart disease?
We need to look at our cardiovascular disease in a completely new light. We need to evaluate patients with a new microscope. We need to peel away the onion, kind of grind down deep so we can see which patients will have silent and invisible disease and start there, rather than diagnosing them at end-stage disease and offering more tertiary care. There's many new forms of testing that simply aren't on the radar when you're looking at cardiovascular disease. For example, we can use salivary tests to assess for a patient's risk for cardiovascular disease. We can use urine tests for inflammation. We can use the biofilm of the patient's teeth. Of course, there's many blood tests, including genetic testing, which in my opinion is vastly underutilized in order to approach an individual patient and apply appropriate preventive treatments to them.
In closing, doctor, can you talk about what is so special about these new tests?
Well, some tests, everybody wants to know what type of tests that we do and how they're different. And really, with looking at a new microscope, you want to connect the different dots between the tests. Some of the tests, for example, the carotid intima media thickness scan, looks at the thickening of the carotid artery before there's even plaque that's detectable. And even better, this is reversible. If you apply the appropriate prevention methodologies, you can get rid of that thickening in the carotid IMT. As a matter of fact, the American Heart Association calls this particular test an independent predictor of both heart attack and stroke. And as a cardiologist, I have many tests that do not do that. So this is a very important test to offer to patients. Others are inflammatory markers that we can get from the urine, we can get from the bloodstream, that tell us where the patient is inflamed and how can we approach the inflammation in that patient's body. Because in cardiology now, it's all about inflammation of the plaque that's inside of the artery. If we can prevent the plaque and we can prevent the inflammation, we can prevent cardiovascular disease, meaning heart attacks and strokes. And then there's some unusual new technologies that are available. For example, looking at the biofilm of the teeth. There's something called the oral systemic connection, where the bacteria that we harbor in our mouths can predispose us to cardiovascular disease. So we need to look in these hidden places that we've never looked before.
All right, doctor, that was great information. We appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Scott.
And you're watching WellNet TV.